Welcome to the channel. Quick, engaging, and straight to the point, that's what you'll get here. If you love content that keeps things interesting without wasting your time, hit subscribe and enjoy the ride.
My husband looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you can't be happy for me having a real friendship with Thora, maybe this marriage isn't working." I held his gaze for 3 full seconds, counted them in my head, before I answered, "You know what? You're probably right." The words came out so quietly that he actually leaned in to make sure he'd heard me correctly. He had. The following morning, I went to my home office, opened the bottom desk drawer, and pulled out the Singapore contract. The one I'd been sitting on for 11 weeks. The one I'd told my boss I needed more time to consider, because I didn't want to upend the life my husband and I had built together in Montclair. I signed every page without stopping once to think about it. 3 days later, when Lawson called to ask if I wanted to grab dinner that Friday, I didn't answer. I sent him a photo instead. Me, at JFK's International Departures Terminal, Singapore Airlines boarding pass visible in my hand, the gate sign behind me. Smiling. Actually smiling. He called twice more, before I switched on airplane mode. That moment is where this story ends. But to understand why it ended there, you need to know where it started. With a text message on a Tuesday morning in September that I wasn't supposed to see, and a name I hadn't thought about in 4 years suddenly becoming the organizing principle of my husband's weekends. Lawson and I had been married for 5 years. We lived in a renovated Victorian in Montclair, New Jersey. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a kitchen we'd gutted and rebuilt together, one tile-laying weekend at a time during our 2nd year together. I was a creative director at an ad agency in Manhattan, commuting 40 minutes each way and genuinely loving most of it. He was a financial analyst, steady, methodical, the kind of calm that had felt like an anchor when I first fell in love with him. We weren't a perfect couple. No such thing exists. But we were solid. I was certain of that. Before me, there had been Thora. They'd dated for 2 years in Brooklyn, when they were both in their late 20s and figuring out what kind of people they wanted to be. Then she moved to Portland to pursue her ceramics practice. They ended things mutually and without drama, and eventually he met me. She stayed in Oregon for 4 years. I heard her name maybe half a dozen times in 5 years of marriage. She was just a name attached to a chapter that was finished. Then she moved back to New York in late September. I found out the way I suspect a lot of people find things out, by accident. I'd reached for my phone on the nightstand and picked up Lawson's by mistake. Same black case, different side of the bed. The screen was already lit. The message was already open. "Can't stop thinking about being back in the same city as you. It's been way too long." The contact name was just T. I set the phone back exactly where I'd found it. I went downstairs and made coffee. I stood at the kitchen counter in the early September quiet, and I told myself it could mean anything. People reconnect. Old friends text dramatically sometimes. It didn't have to mean what my stomach was already telling me it meant. 2 days later, Lawson mentioned, very casually, at the kitchen sink, not quite looking at me, that he was getting brunch Sunday with an old friend. Thora. She was back in town, still getting settled, needed familiar faces around. He said it the same way he'd announce a dry cleaning pickup. I said, that sounded fine. It didn't. But I was still trying to be the person who trusts their husband. I'd been told my whole adult life that jealousy was a character flaw, that suspicion was the enemy of intimacy. I was determined to be better than my worst instincts. The first Sunday he came home 90 minutes late. He smelled like a restaurant, not a coffee shop, a restaurant. Wine, something braised. When I asked how it went, he said, "Good, she's holding up okay," and opened his laptop. The conversation was over before it started. I noticed things after that the way you notice a slow leak. Not all at once, but drop by drop. Lawson had always been low maintenance about his appearance on weekends. Jeans, whatever shirt was clean, 5 minutes in the bathroom. By late October he was spending 20 minutes in front of the mirror on Sunday mornings, going through a routine I didn't recognize. A different cologne appeared on the bathroom shelf. Heavier, more expensive. The kind he'd worn on our first anniversary dinner at a restaurant in the city, where we'd ordered wine we couldn't technically afford and didn't care. I asked about the cologne once, and he said it was something he'd picked up for a client event earlier in the week. It was a Sunday. I called my friend Gail. We'd been close since graduate school, and she had opinions about relationships the way some people have opinions about wine, with total confidence and very little humility. I described what I was noticing: the grooming changes, the timing, the texts. She stirred her iced coffee and looked at me with patient exasperation. "You're projecting," she said. "Men can have friendships with their exes. It means he's emotionally grown up." I left that lunch feeling more alone than when I'd arrived. My business partner, Matteo, had a different reaction. We'd built our client portfolio together over 3 years, and he knew me well enough to notice when I was only halfway present in strategy meetings. One afternoon in early November, I told him what was going on. Not looking for validation. I was just tired of carrying it by myself. He listened. Then he was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than comfortable. Then he said he should probably tell me something. The previous Sunday, he'd been at a restaurant in the West Village. Nice place. Cloth napkins, the kind of menu that changes seasonally. He'd seen Lawson there with a woman. Brunette, artistic looking, the kind of effortless style that makes everything look intentional. He'd thought it was odd because Lawson had mentioned a casual Sunday coffee to him too. They weren't having coffee, Matteo said. He chose his next words carefully. They looked like they'd been there a while. That night I opened Thora's Instagram for the first time. Her account was public. Curated clay sculptures. Moody photographs of half-finished work. The aesthetic of someone who'd made their whole life a gallery installation. She was genuinely talented. I noticed that even through everything else I was feeling. And I almost wished I hadn't. The locations she tagged were the thing that made my hands go cold. Prospect Park, around the time Lawson had come home smelling like afternoon air and said they'd just walked around a bit. The High Line on another Sunday. The West Village restaurant Matteo had described. She wasn't just spending time with my husband. She was photographing it. Soft autumn light, empty wine glasses, the particular composition of someone who understood that what you document becomes real. I started keeping a folder on my phone. Screenshots, timestamps, credit card statements. I'd started reviewing more carefully than usual. I wasn't building a legal case. I think I just needed to make myself believe what I was seeing, because part of my brain kept searching for the innocent explanation, the way a tongue keeps finding a sore spot. In November, my boss called with an offer he'd been circling back to since August. The agency was opening an Asia-Pacific division in Singapore. He wanted me to lead it. My own team, full creative authority over strategy and execution. A salary figure that made me have to read it twice. He gave me until the end of the month to decide. I asked for more time again. I'd been asking for more time since August. I kept saying no because of Lawson. Because of the house, and the life, and the 5 years of choosing each other. You don't walk away from a marriage for a job offer, no matter how extraordinary. At least, that's what I kept telling myself, while I watched the marriage walk away from me, one Sunday at a time. The thing that finally cracked me open happened on a Thursday evening in November. My mother died when I was 26. She left very little behind, she'd never had much. But in her final weeks, she gave me her jewelry box, and inside it was a brooch she'd worn to every important occasion of her adult life. Art Deco, silver and marcasite, shaped like a starburst. She'd bought it herself with her first real paycheck, at 22 years old. She told me that story every single time she pinned it on, how she'd walked into a vintage shop on her lunch break, and felt, for the first time, like someone who owned something that was completely hers. In October, Lawson had asked to borrow it. An artist friend was having a gallery opening. Important networking, he said. And he thought it would look striking on a blazer lapel. He had a thing about unexpected accessories. It wasn't a strange request under normal circumstances. I said yes because I trusted him. That's what you do with someone you've promised your life to. On that Thursday evening in November, Thora posted an Instagram story from a gallery opening in Chelsea. Black dress, effortless hair, the brooch pinned to her shoulder. The silver starburst caught the gallery lighting perfectly. I recognized it before I consciously registered what I was looking at. I sat on the bathroom floor for a while after that, not crying exactly. Something quieter than crying, and in some ways worse. The stillness that descends when you realize you haven't been paranoid. You've been right all along. And being right about this is a specific kind of grief. Our 5th anniversary came in December. Lawson forgot. Not almost forgot, completely forgot, in the way that only happens when something doesn't occupy any real space in your mind. He came home that Sunday evening and seemed genuinely puzzled when I mentioned the date. He said he'd been distracted with work, that we'd celebrate properly the following weekend. We didn't. I moved into the guest room. I told myself it was because his phone kept buzzing late at night, and I had early client calls. The more honest reason was that sharing a bed with someone who has stopped organizing his life toward yours is a particular kind of loneliness I hadn't known existed before I was inside it. In January, our neighbor Mrs. Brewer stopped me on the front walk on a Saturday morning. She was friendly and warm the way she always was, mentioning she'd seen Lawson in Brookside Park the previous Sunday, walking with a woman. Such a lovely couple. She started to say, and then she caught my expression and she revised quickly. Said maybe she'd been mistaken, she'd been meaning to get new glasses. She hadn't been mistaken. By February I'd made my decision, I just hadn't said it out loud yet. Then Lawson came downstairs one Sunday morning, dressed like he was meeting someone who mattered, and I asked, very calmly, whether he ever thought about what I might need on the weekends I spent by myself. He gave me the look he kept in reserve for clients who asked unreasonable things. He told me I was making something out of nothing. He said adults, who were emotionally secure, could handle their partners having friendships, and I think he genuinely believed this would end the conversation. He said that if I couldn't get comfortable with his friendship with Thora, maybe this marriage wasn't working. He said it, the way people say things they expect will land like a threat. I looked at him for 3 full seconds. You know what? I said. You're probably right. The silence afterward was unlike any silence we'd had in 5 years of marriage. This one had weight and a direction. I watched him process it, recalibrating, searching for the script he'd prepared for. He'd expected tears, maybe anger, a negotiation. The one thing he hadn't expected was agreement, delivered quietly, with no drama attached to it. I went to my home office and closed the door and opened my email. My boss had sent the Singapore contract for the 4th time 3 days earlier, with a note that said simply, "Whenever you're ready." I printed it. I read it through completely. I signed every page. That was a Sunday. By Tuesday I had a real estate agent's number saved in my phone. The house was mine. I'd owned it. Before we married, the mortgage in my name alone. Purchased on the strength of a bonus, and the stubbornness of a 30-year-old woman who wanted to own something that was hers without condition. Lawson hadn't thought about that. People rarely think about the ground they're standing on until it moves. He began walking things back Monday morning. I didn't mean it the way it came out. We should talk about this properly. You know how I get when I feel backed into a corner. I listened to all of it. I poured him coffee from the same pot I always made. I was very calm. I told him I'd already signed the contract. The color left his face so completely, so fast, that I almost asked if he was feeling okay. You can't just, he started. I can, I said, and I did. He spent 3 weeks cycling between apologetic and accusatory, between suggesting couples therapy and implying I was being dramatic. I started packing. I arranged for shipping. I sold what I didn't want. What was left, I left. Before I flew out, I asked for my mother's brooch back. He returned it without a word of explanation about how it had ended up on another woman's shoulder at a gallery opening. That silence told me more than any explanation would have. 3 weeks after I signed the contract, I was standing in JFK's International Terminal when his name lit up on my phone. He was asking about Friday dinner, as if any of the previous weeks were simply an argument that had run its course. I took a photo, the departures board behind me, the boarding pass in my hand, my face, and I was genuinely smiling in a way I hadn't managed in months. I sent it without a caption. He called twice. I was already past security. Singapore is extraordinary in the specific way that places are extraordinary when they have no history attached to you. Nobody in my new office knew me as someone's wife. Nobody had an opinion about whether I'd been reasonable or whether I should have waited longer. I was the creative director who'd come from New York with a mandate to build something from the ground up, and that's exactly what I did. Within 3 months, we'd signed 4 major clients. My team was small and fast and genuinely talented, and the work reminded me why I'd chosen this career in the first place. The feeling of making something from nothing, the particular satisfaction of a campaign that actually lands. I stopped checking Lawson's social media somewhere around month 2. I stopped missing him somewhere around month 3. The timeline surprised me, and then it didn't. Gail called to relay what she'd heard from mutual friends. Thora had moved back to New York under the impression that Lawson was in the final stages of leaving me. That the marriage was essentially finished. Just paperwork and timing. That's what he'd told her. When I preemptively dissolved things by actually leaving, it collapsed whatever structure he'd built between them. Thora was not interested in a man who'd constructed a fantasy on top of lies. The version of Lawson she'd been sold didn't survive contact with the version who was left behind after his wife quietly packed up and flew to another continent. 6 months after I arrived in Singapore, I flew back to New York for a client presentation. I reached out to Thora before the trip, not from anger. I was past that, and not entirely from curiosity. I think I needed to close the loop, to sit across from the whole truth of it once, without any buffers. We met at a coffee shop in the West Village. She looked tired in the specific way people look when they've been genuinely humiliated and are still metabolizing it. She didn't make excuses. She told me what he'd said about our marriage. The version he'd given her, the one where we'd grown apart and were staying together out of inertia and shared finances. She said she would never have come back to New York if she'd known the truth. I thought I was stepping into something that was already over. She said. I didn't know I was helping end something that wasn't. She apologized, and it sounded like she meant it. I believed her. She was another person who'd been handed a false map and trusted it. We sat there for a while. 2 women with nothing in common, except a man who had needed each of us to believe a different version of a story he was writing, entirely for himself. There was something almost peaceful about it. No more guessing, no more screenshots. No more sitting on bathroom floors in the middle of the night. She told me, before we left, that Lawson was renting an apartment in Hoboken. Alone. The kind of place that's as temporary even when it becomes permanent. I walked back out into a January afternoon in the West Village, and thought about 5 years in that Montclair Victorian. The tile we'd chosen, for the kitchen backsplash. The Sunday mornings before any of this started, when everything felt like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. I grieved that version of things for a while, and then I stopped. Because grief is only useful as long as it's honest. And the honest truth is that what I'd been fighting to save had already been gone for a long time. Before I figured out it was missing. My mother's brooch is on my desk in Singapore. I pinned it to a small piece of velvet so it catches the afternoon light when I'm working. Some days I forget it's there. Other days it's the first thing I see when I sit down, and I think about her buying it at 22 with her first real paycheck. The feeling of owning something that was entirely hers, that no one could take back from her. She understood even then that some things you have to claim for yourself. I'm still learning, but I'm learning.